Hello, gumshoes. Sorry for jumping on so late. I decided to stop by uh, Joe's apartment where he died, and that put me behind schedule. But I'm glad I did it. So I'll give everyone a chance to join. Wow, my mods are so fast. You guys are amazing. Hey, Trevor. I'm glad we'll have a dude in here because I will be talking about dudes tonight. Um, so hopefully everyone has kind of gotten the big news of like Nancy Joe's testimony out of their system. There were some fireworks between Nancy Joe and Lori, and I knew that would be a crowd pleaser. For me, again, I'm a bit of a Rain Man, and that wasn't particularly interesting to me. But I will talk about Nancy Joe's testimony. I will try, as always, to be respectful of all of these witnesses, Nancy Joe in particular. I really question why the state brought her on as a witness. I know that she has experienced some pretty significant personal tragedy not too long ago, and I'm not sure that the juice was worth the squeeze, as I like to say. But anyway, I think I'm going to go sequentially through the day. The thing that concerned me most today was actually what we started off with, and I tried to find the audio or even the video of Lori's statement before the jury was brought in. I guess that wasn't public, so I was hoping I would just get to play it, just so that there was like, I took notes. But I was also like researching as I was taking notes. I did not work on the app at all today because it was a wild ride. But we started off the day before the jury came in with Lori stating on the record her objection, with the judge allowing Detective Coons to testify as an expert witness. I could tell that most likely her counsel, her advisory counsel, helped her with the statement because it was very to the point. It was incisive. It was, I had these constitutional rights and they were violated by you, the judge, overruling my objection. So the heart of her objection was that she objected to Detective Coons being changed kind of in the 11th hour. They made it within the 30 days. I guess they have like 30 days before the preliminary hearing, or arraignment, or I think it was a preliminary hearing here, to change his status from witness to expert witness. And the state has not contested this, so I'm inclined to believe Lori's claim that they never submitted his qualifications, which apparently are usually submitted in the form of a CV or curriculum vitae. So that's typically it's like, imagine a resume on roids. They're used a lot in the in engineering, but also, like for expert witnesses, they're also supposed to submit what the expert witness plans to testify about. I don't know if they did that, but these these qualifications, according to Lori, were not submitted to the defense. So I was doing some research today about it, and apparently the defense is also they are entitled to like a special hearing, and there's a name for the hearing, like to even contest the qualifications of the defense. So again, I'm out of my depth on this. I'm just trying to report what she said. But one thing that was interesting, but for me also concerning, is when the judge, well, let me back up. So my first concern, having already known that she contested even before the trial started, Detective Coons being switched to an expert witness. And why does it even matter if someone's a witness or an expert witness? Well, apparently an expert witness is the only kind of witness that can offer opinion. So a regular witness, they can't share their opinion, but an expert witness can share their opinion, and their opinion carries more weight because they're an expert witness. So I don't think that she is just being pedantic over this, because he was testifying as he was testifying to the trajectory and some of the is it feasible given the placement of the rounds, the one in the baseboard and the one that was in the middle of the room, were they consistent with the statements that they received from particularly Alex, because they actually brought Alex back to the house and had him do a walkthrough. They also wanted Lori to, but she was like, "Oh, I have to pick up my son." They're like, "Oh, okay." So that was that. But so they did this walkthrough with Alex, and he also drew a diagram. And so Detective Coons was basically testifying as an expert witness if the basically, like, if the evidence lines up with the statements. Now, I am not an expert witness, but I have stated, and I will reassert tonight, just evidence from their own police report that is, I think, contradicts some of what he testified to. So, okay, so my concern was when the judge, when she brought it back up, like right at the start of the trial, in my opinion, the judge misstated her concern, and he said, "Well, I thought you were just mostly expressing concern about the timing, and the timing was fine. They made it, within the 30 days or whatever." And she reasserted, and I agree with her. She was very clear about it was the qualifications and the lack of a CV. And I do, I'm obviously not pro Lori. She's a raging psychopath, but I do have this compulsion to look at the facts, and I so badly want the state to make a compelling case. I'm not as concerned about some of the theatrics with witnesses. I am like a dog with a bone. I really am just like, okay, we're on day 3, and so far I haven't heard any evidence that leans toward conspiracy, and that is what they are supposed to prove. Now, they still have plenty of time to do that, but there was a hint of it today, but I'll get to that. But anyway, so the judge on, I think this was on day 1, had said, I think that was really just more about, timing. It wasn't. Lori reasserted No, it wasn't just about the timing. It was about, the qualifications and CV. And so then today, when she kind of had her Sermon on the Mount about, her constitutional rights, and then the judge, she had her thrust and he was ready to parry, and he asked her a question, and she decisively said, "I'm not going to argue the point with you. I just wanted to go on the record." And for me, obviously, I think appeals are almost unavoidable, but I do have a concern that we may have just all but handed her an appeal. So that today, in addition to visiting Joe's apartment, I was doing quite a bit of research because I don't want to just be a Debbie Downer. And I know, I knew when I left today. I was like, I just left right away because I just felt a little heavy. Not that, who cares how I felt, but it is my life. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it. But I just knew when I left, it was like, I know everyone. I'm not even going to look at YouTube. I know everyone is going to be talking about Nancy Joe telling her, like, basically, don't be so full of yourself. We weren't just talking about you. And then, here I walked away feeling pretty heavy. Like, again, what was it even worth it? Like, was his testimony even worth the risk of, like, and why would the state even put the judge and the case in this precarious position of, like, okay, you want to change him to an expert witness, why not just submit the qualifications? Like, this just, it's such a high profile case. I don't know, it gives me pause. I'm like, is this now just like a Maricopa County thing? Like, can we expect, like, is everyone just going to be playing, like, kind of loose and free with, some of the rules and stuff? But so I looked up the disclosure rules that the state, either side is beholden to. So in Arizona, Rule 51(1), the state's disclosure, so I guess this is particular to the state, requires prosecutors to disclose an expert's name, opinions, basis for those opinions, and qualifications, usually in the form of a CV. So that I'm not reading directly from their, that was a summary. That's my summary. So what it actually says, for each expert, oh, wait a minute, no, I'm sorry. It might end up being unrealistic for me to do this every day. Let me just double check. I don't think it said, I think I added the detail about a CV. Yes, so I added that detail. So this actually came straight from that, from the rule. For each expert who has examined a defendant or any evidence in the case, or who the state intends to call at trial, that it must, submit the expert's name, address, and qualifications, any report prepared by the expert, and the results of any completed physical examination, scientific test, experiment, or comparison conducted by the expert. And C, if the expert will testify at trial without preparing a written report, a summary of the general subject matter and opinions on which the expert is expected to testify. So I don't know if they submitted a report to the defense. I think the main issue was not submitting the qualifications. So the judge overruled Lori's objection, framing it as a timing issue. Again, Lori clarified that her concern was about the lack of disclosure, not just when the state changed the status. Okay, so I don't just strongly suspect, I know. Her objection was preserved for an appeal. So, okay. So I want to talk a little bit about Detective Kuhn's testimony on bullet trajectory, because if it's perceived as scientifically questionable or outside his expertise, it could further support a claim of unfair trial conditions, from what I read. And one questionable detail is the scarring on the floor. So we have heard, and I was more than a little disappointed with myself. I was disappointed that I just kind of took Chandler and Police's word for it, that, I've believed as soon as I read the police report that as soon as they moved Charles' body, they found this pooling of blood in this, scarring, this, crevice, if you will, in the wood floor. And I really kind of took them at their word that, I imagined this was probably a pretty deep scar, in the wood. And, it was used to help establish the trajectory and all that. I did find out in the midst of the trial that it's called a full metal jacket round. So it wasn't a hollow point bullet. I'll just use the word bullet, although technically it's round. So so then I was today I was looking up, okay, so what does a spent full metal jacket, or FMJ, round look like? And anyway, we'll get to more of that in a minute. But since he testified as an expert witness that it was his opinion that the scarring on the floor was consistent with Charles having already, been down, that's pretty significant. And I'm assuming, I don't know, maybe more evidence will come in, but at this point, this is all we have to work with. At this point, I'm just, as John Pryor would say, I'm laying foundation. I'm going to hit on these things more, including pictures. So, okay. So let me talk a little bit about Detective Kuhn's. First, the positive. I really appreciated that today he was less emotional and reactive. I talked about this last night. I just kind of felt yesterday like he was playing to the crowd, and there was more of that today with the witnesses. But especially with someone from law enforcement, I have much less patience for it, especially given the ramifications of their lack of investigation. I really have. So, I mean, who cares? But this is my channel, so. But today, I noticed he was much calmer. Last night I think I even said, suck it up, Buttercup. Yeah, this is hard. But she's a kitty cat compared to John Pryor. I know that people are getting really upset with her, and in many ways, she's out of her depth. She really needed, professional counsel defending her. However, at the same time, it is my opinion that she is not doing as badly as I thought she would. When I saw her being so reactive to the judge, disrespectful to the judge, really just digging her heels in, I was concerned that it was just going to be like a clown car. But she, so far, with the exception of her questioning of Nancy Jo, which again, I think it was as awkward and cringy as it was because she's the defendant questioning someone who went on a date with her estranged husband. She's very competitive. She's very petty, but at the same time, I mean, again, if I think back to the trials in Idaho, John Pryor and even John Thomas and Jim Archibald, they were much tougher on witnesses. Like, and I really liked Jim Archibald. Like, he has been my favorite attorney on a personal level. He was he was the warmest of any official, like, person in Idaho. And very, professional. But he was just a warm, genuine guy. Like, no daggers. And if I had expected daggers from anyone, I would have thought, yeah, okay, Lori's attorney, that would be fair. But anyway, I mean, he was very hard on Audrey Baratiero, and so, yeah, I think what makes this uncomfortable is that she's the defendant, and and I think it makes for good television, but with a few exceptions, I just don't think she was that out of bounds, but that's not to defend her. I mean, really, that is just me, that I'm sharing my observations, and this is my gravitational pull. Like, I am watching these trials much like an engineer would. Like, okay, that's good. That's not so good. And there were times where, Trina expressed so much frustration about, having to object. But then when she was questioning the witnesses, she would do the same thing. Like, I was sitting watching going, okay, asked and answered, leading question, testifying, and not that it even matters what I think, but I'm just kind of like, okay, but she's a trained attorney, and and so anyway, so whatever I do, she also, like, she was asking questions, and then she would just kind of do this summary, and I saw John Pryor do the same thing, John Thomas do the same thing, Jim Archibald do the same thing. You're hitting a lot of details, and then sometimes they'll just kind of summarize. And I always thought it was for the sake of the jurors who, are drinking from a fire hose. And so I do, again, I have no training, but it does, like, I did start to question today, are we actually holding Lori to a higher standard than most attorneys? No, I do think that she asks the same question too many times. She gets, just too much in a groove. But there was one time today, she did that summary, and then Trina, was very reactive about it. Which, I mean, all is fair in love, war, and things that don't go objected. And that is another point I'll make. I am surprised how little Lori is objecting. It may be that she's just not familiar enough with the law, but she's not even objecting to things that she's being objected, or she's receiving objections for. So anyway, but anyway, so okay, so back to Detective Coons. I appreciated that he was just much more about the facts. I felt like he was more respectful. He wasn't playing to the crowd as much. I expressed frustration last night. Like sometimes he would answer Lori's questions with overly technical jargon, in my opinion, and I'm like, well, that's great. Yeah, I'm sure that, yeah, you totally dusted Lori on that question, but that also means that you are potentially losing jurors. If they don't know this technical jargon that you're peppering her with, then you're spitting into the wind, because if they don't understand what you're saying, you're going to lose them. Okay. One thing I was very surprised to find out today is that they didn't do any testing on the bullet that he proposes was the one that, went through Charles' abdomen, hit multiple organs, and a rib, and and then caused that scarring in on the floor, and I was very surprised to find out that they didn't send that in for testing. Like, they cut out the piece of flooring, so they had the flooring, they had the round, and as I'll talk about more in a minute. No, actually, this is a good time to talk about it. So the fire captain, I think he was a fire captain because it just says captain and then redacts his last name. In fact, let me share my screen on this one, because I feel like this is significant enough. Let's see. Okay, so this was in the Chandler police report. I'll zoom in. And like I said, I think that this was the fire captain, but they have his name redacted. Captain so-and-so stated he also observed shell casings on the floor and quote, actual bullet on the floor next to where he stood. So he's talking about the bullet that was, again, I think they put actual bullet in quotations because they refer to it as a round. But on the floor next to where he stood, he noted the bullet was not particularly misshapen, with an absence of any expansion. So I talked about this in another live, but I had looked up, like, okay, well, what does that mean? And so, all right, so I looked at the wound path again today from the ME's report, and this was the wound path. So this was the path of, like, basically the damage that the bullet caused as it, like, entered Charles' abdomen and made its way out the exit point, which was the shoulder. Skin and subcutaneous tissue of the left abdomen, the upper lobe of the left lung. So first it hit his left abdomen, then the upper lobe of the left lung, the posterolateral left fourth rib. So it also hit bone and soft tissues of the left intercostal space, and the subcutaneous tissue and skin of the posterior left shoulder. So it exited out his shoulder, like between his shoulder and the floor. So when I pulled up the picture of the photo again, and the picture of the round, I did some comparisons once I had the terminology full metal jacket bullet, and then I was also using AI. So full disclosure, like, I gave it like a specific prompt, like, you're an Arizona law expert, blah 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 blah. You can and you can share images, and so I gave it what the fire captain had commented about the round, and then the picture of it, like, zoomed in. And the analysis was the shape is uniform and rounded, consistent with a full metal jacket bullet that has not struck hard tissue or surfaces in a way that caused deformation. There is no visible trace of blood. The police report noted that there was a, quote, red substance on the bullet. There is no visible trace of blood, tissue, or damage that would indicate it passed through a human body, particularly one where ribs were struck. The autopsy shows this bullet pierced Charles Vallow's left side, went through his lung. I already went through all that. But the bullet they found just a few feet away, so they estimate 2 to 3 feet away, is clean, smooth, and nearly flawless. That doesn't happen. Again, I'm just reading the report that AI gave. So even a full metal jacket round would deform slightly from hitting bone, and it certainly wouldn't land upright on the floor with no blood or visible damage. Okay, so yeah, so that, and then I already mentioned last night that there was no, so Detective Coons was testifying as an expert witness. Yes, the placement of the round in the floor, it is consistent with, with their statements, with the exception of Alex had said that Charles was standing for both shots. And Chandler police asserted that the scarring on the wood floor proved that Charles was already down for the second shot. First of all, let me just say, I still believe that Charles was down for the second shot, or for whatever that matters, but is more because of their testimony, or it hasn't been testimony so far. The statement in the police report about there being so little bleeding from the second wound, and typically when there's not a lot of bleeding from a wound, so there was a lot of bleeding from the first wound, from the chest wound, but there wasn't very much bleeding from the second wound. And from what I found, that typically, I don't even know if it's safe to say typically, it could indicate that the victim was already dead or close to dead, but certainly incapacitated. The thing that I was surprised about today, another thing that I was surprised about is, so when the state showed the scarring on the floor, to my memory, it was zoomed in, and it also included the pooling of the blood. And I had no reason to question that. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But then today, and if you were watching it, I don't think you're able to see anything on the screen. But Lori showed a photo from what Chandler police took that showed the scarring on the floor more zoomed out enough to show 2 other divots on the floor and no pooling of the blood. And unless there was some kind of sleight of hand, or the angle was deceptive. Again, she would have only gotten this from, as far as I know, from their own police report. It was a much smaller divot than I had expected. In my opinion, it just didn't look that much bigger than 2 other divots on the floor, very close to this divot. Again, I'm really not even playing devil's advocate. I'm just sharing my observations, because most of the people watching this live, you're probably watching this live because you're not in the courtroom, or you hate me. But anyway, so I'm kidding for the most part. But so that was surprising to me, and I'm just going to keep an eye out for if they do show any other photos. But when you combine from what I could tell, the scarring, so I think what I pictured, especially since they used it to assess like the trajectory path, or help assess the trajectory path and stuff. I was expecting at least scarring that was like maybe that long and pretty deep, because if the shooter was standing over Charles and shooting into him, but it's also kind of at an unusual angle, and which is the reason I've always questioned if it was Lori, because Alex was 6'2", so this was the second shot came in at a much shallower angle. I forget what it was that I mean, yeah. It was just kind of like more horizontal, and I had always wondered, like, this sounds like someone who's like closer to the floor. Like, I would think that someone who's standing over him would like shoot more, vertically. But I definitely expected this scarring to be deeper and wider. But then to find out that, so Detective Coons had described the, let me make sure, let me look at my notes because I don't want to misquote him. I think this was a direct quote. The back end is oval instead of round. So that was the degree of, he called it deformation. That was the degree of deformity to this bullet. So the back end, where it's normally round, was oval. But again, according to the fire captain, it wasn't expanded, and if it tore through wood and bone and then exited, I've already questioned the trajectory, but because it just doesn't make any sense that it would like exit out his shoulder and then hang a sharp right and land maybe 2 to 3 feet, I think is what they've been saying, to his left, like, just kind of what was it? I think that was east, due east of his left shoulder, and not even so much as like a blood trail or anything that indicate, like, how did this round that, like, it should be significantly misshapen, I would imagine, and expanded. So, take that for what you will. But that was my impression from his testimony. I think that was it for him. Let me just double check my notes. Okay, yeah. Moving ahead to Nancy Joe. First of all, the caveat, like I mentioned in the beginning, I just can't imagine what this woman has gone through, and I can't imagine the stress of, like, she knew this man for 1 week. She said that they first came in contact, she estimated July 3rd. And then they had their first and only date on July 10th. And now she's like, she's been mixed into this maelstrom, ever since. So having said that, and I cannot express enough, just empathy for her, especially given some of the personal tragedies that she's experienced recently. I don't have personal knowledge of that. Someone who lives in the area shared that with me. But anyway, so I just can't imagine how stressful this had to have been. Having said all of that, and I know that it was scintillating. I mean, she was combative. She was ready. She was locked and loaded, ready to answer, Lori's questions and hold her on. And and she had every right to do that. having said all of that, when I put myself in, and this is what I keep trying to do, I keep trying to pull myself out of, you know, ant mode, and even like analyst mode, data scientist mode, you know, like all of these different modes. And when I put myself into not only the mind of a juror who ostensibly knows very little about this case, or this victim, but especially the fact that this is a primarily male jury. And I believe that was by design. We started with 3 females. We are now down to 2. One is, it looks like a tomboy, so I don't think that, I mean, I don't want to profile, but she just doesn't look like she would be someone who would be like kind of giddy over, like, yeah, Nancy Joe really told him. I think, I try to operate under the assumption that these jurors, although they were definitely much more cued in during the Nancy Joe testimony, because it was good theater, and it was interesting. But when it comes time to decide if the state has, provided proof beyond shadow of a doubt that Lori did indeed participate in the conspiracy to murder her husband, it's incumbent upon these jurors to put aside all of that. And by the time they make this decision, that's probably going to be pretty far in their rearview mirror anyway. But when they actually have the opportunity to start talking about the evidence, especially because this is a primarily male jury, I am inclined to think they are going to be very focused on the facts. So the true crime community, we kind of get, caught up in more the emotion and the drama, and drama's not even the right word. Drama has negative connotations, just the theater of it. Like, we've been waiting, many of us have been waiting since December 2019 to see some kind of justice for Charles, and many have carried these victims in their hearts. They've been so pained to have these details come out, even the cringy details of how, some of these victims were less than perfect, and, all of these different details, and so, it's understandable that we are going to be like, yeah, you go, Nancy Joe, but a juror, when I put myself in a juror's shoes, this is what I thought. Some of the things that she said, I think the jurors are going to have a difficult time with. I don't think that they're going to see her as a very credible witness. First of all, she really had no significant testimony that there was conspiracy, and they had to be very careful about hearsay. So she got in a little dig about Lori having an affair, but so far the jury doesn't know that there's proof about that. But her claim that in the 1 week that they knew each other, that they exchanged hundreds of text messages, I think, and I'm not questioning if that's the truth. I'm not making any indictments against her character, or, I feel like I just can't build enough bridges, but I have to. Like, I'm going to stop building bridges and just say, okay, I'm in the mind of a juror. Dudes, they're trying to, like, they're obviously going to have an easier time identifying with Charles. Like, okay, I just met a woman on a dating site. Hundreds of text messages in 1 week before even meeting her. I think that's going to be tough to prove. And Lori did discount her claim by asking her, "Did you submit those messages to the state?" And then Nancy Joe said, "No, but I would have if they had asked for it." And I imagine for the state that had to be a moment of like, like, okay, great. Now we have a witness on the stand saying, "Oh yeah, I would have given them all of my text messages if they had just asked for them." But for a juror, there is no proof that they exchanged hundreds of text messages. She also said they talked for hours at a time, and that that may or may be true, may or may not be true. For these men, is it going to be a little more difficult? Maybe not until some of the other details came out, where Lori, excuse me, started asking her, "Have you been in communication with Kay Woodcock? Have you been in communication with any of the other family members?" And then, so yes, she had been in communication with Kay. She was guarded in answering the questions, which again, that's totally fair. I would probably come across as guarded just because I'm such an overthinker. However, it still makes an impression to the jury. And then I think another thing that may be difficult for them to believe is that she just happened to run into two different family members at social events. Again, don't come at me saying, "No, like Mormons have social events all the time." I'm not saying I don't believe her. I'm saying a jury, especially a jury full of men who are just going to be like, have I ever texted a chick hundreds of times before meeting her? Have I ever talked to her for hours? She also said that Charles had disclosed to her that he was talking to, I think Trina even said, like, lots of other women or a number of other women. He was talking to a lot of women. And she said that, yes, he had disclosed that to her. And not only that, but he had disclosed to her that some of them were trying to get money from him, and he thought that was funny. Again, it might be true, but the reality is, would a guy disclose that? Because in Charles' case, he actually was being catfished, and he did send thousands of dollars. We don't know how many thousands, but in the police report, it did include that he, I think, was communicating with, I believe, 14 other women, and that was just in Google Chat. Like, they didn't include like dating apps or anything. So, maybe, but I think that could be difficult for them to believe. And if it hadn't been, I think something that may have really hurt her was, I believe she was talking about meeting Adam. I think originally she had said they just happened to meet at a pickleball competition that she was at for her grandson, and she recognized him, and then they they had moved on, and she kind of stopped and extemporaneously was like, I don't remember how she worded it, but like basically was like, can I update my testimony? I actually saw him on a dating app, and I don't remember the details, but it was something like she recognized his picture, but said like maybe you shouldn't use another name, or I didn't really, I don't remember the details. But then the jury is faced with, okay, so you originally said you met him you just happened to see him at a pickleball competition and recognize him, but then, oh wait, no, we did communicate on this dating app, and then with Brandon, it was another social event. So why could this be, why could this hurt her credibility with a jury? There is the possibility that the jury could perceive her as, okay, you only knew this guy for a week, and then and there's absolutely no issue with having contacted family members. I mean, her world was just, kind of flipped upside down. So there's no fault in reaching out to people. Like, many of us, myself included, like, I've reached out to people. I have like a ride or die group of women who I am just so grateful to have. And I didn't go on a date with Charles and then later find out that he had died, was killed the next day. So so she did nothing wrong in reaching out to these people. But for a jury to hear all of that, like, yeah, I've been in communication with all these family members, and now I'm saying, well, no, but yeah, I was in communication with them, but I am aware of just how dicey things were with Lori, and had all these details about how she was cheating, and all of these things, because we exchanged hundreds of text messages and talked for hours on the phone. And that's the piece that I think a jury may discount. So again, no disrespect to Nancy Jo. I thought she was beautiful. And the like non-analyst part of me, the part of me that was like, she might be the only person who gets to say what we've all wanted to say to Lori, like, don't give yourself airs, like, you weren't the as the focal point of our date night conversation. But anyway, okay. All right, so moving forward to Christina. For me, Christina was the most difficult testimony to listen to. So I just feel like I need to disclose that. I am still going to try to be as fair as possible and really focus on, once again, the jury. But at the same time, I will cover some details about her involvement. I did go into more details. Like, I think if you search A Murderous Heart for Christina, I have shared at least a video. She did share quite a bit more about just how much, and like, yeah, they did have I believe it was a casting. I think she dismissed it as more like prayer for Tylee, and I think, if memory serves me, I think that was the closest anyone has come, except Serena had shared in one of her meetings, one of her not meetings, interviews with Rexburg police, that Lori did say that Tylee was a dark spirit, and it was really hard to live with someone who was so dark. And some of these details, like, they are difficult to absorb, so I'm not even going to touch on some of the things that Christina said about Tylee, and just focus more on her testimony. One thing that she said that was interesting to me was, she said that Lori invited her to go to Hawaii. She thought it was in the summer of 2018. Now, she was very vague, very, couldn't remember much of anything that just happened to possibly make her look like she was closer to Lori or more involved in this group. But we do know that after Joe was found, Lori took off for Hawaii, which is a solid pattern. We also knew that she told friends when she was there, according to Anne Eliason, she told April Raymond and Angelina Law, or Angeline, one of those two, Law, that Lori had bragged that she paid Alex to kill Joe. And so I suspect that, again, I don't want to be unfair, but given Lori's habit of jet setting off to Hawaii anytime something suspicious happens, and given the fact that no one in Hawaii said that she had visited any other time in 2018. It was only after Joe was found. She didn't make the multiple trips to Hawaii until January or February, I think it was February 2019, after, yeah, it was definitely February. It was after the big blow up between her and Charles. And the first time she went down with Tylee, then she went down by herself, and Tylee stayed at Alex's. So I suspect that Christina was being deceptive and just trying to push it to the summer to distance herself from. I definitely wasn't good friends with Lori, good enough friends to be invited to go with her to Hawaii after her first husband was found dead. But that was new information. Okay. She also said that in reference to Alex, and this is where we were starting to inch our way closer to potential, like, oh, okay, does that have a slight scent of possible conspiracy? I do believe it does. So she was talking about, they were at some get together, I'm sure one of their castings, and she was uncomfortable with Alex because he was loud and all of that, but she heard him say that he just wished he could kill Charles, and she described him as being jocular when he said it. And apparently he said it at least twice, and one of the times was outside of Lori's hearing, and the other time he said it around Lori. And Trina asked her, how that made her feel. She said she was disturbed by him saying this, but Lori wasn't. She described it as being upsetting. And I think she said this was their March get together. Let me see. So I have notes that I took, and then I have like summary notes that I wanted to hit on in the live. But no, I'll look that up. But it was earlier, like it wasn't like right before Charles was killed. So she, said that she was disturbed by that, but Lori wasn't. And Trina asked her, did Lori say to Alex, no, you can't do that? And Trina and Christina said no. She didn't. She didn't say no. You can't do that. But then Trina asked her if she ever heard Lori say anything disturbing, and Christina testified that Lori said she crushed up a significant amount of JJ's medicine and put it in Charles' drink. So we've heard different versions of this. I think Serena said, "Oh, it was just Xanax, that she just put Xanax in Charles' drink because he was so uptight." And so, she didn't. And then in another testimony, someone had said that she said she tried to poison uh, uh, Charles, and I think that may have been Zulema. But so Christina said that she was so disturbed by this that she met with Lori the next day. So this happened on June 9th. So now we're coming up on the murder date. This was just a little more than a month before Charles was murdered. And she said she met with Lori the next day to confront her. And she told Lori that if anything ever happened to Charles, that she would go to the police. And but Lori, tamped down, basically what was saying, oh no, that was just saber rattling. We got kind of carried away. I didn't actually give him as much as I said I did. And she had told Lieutenant Ball this, that, she told Lori, if anything happens to Charles, I'm going to the police. And even when she said that, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, she said that out loud but like, obviously something happened to Charles, almost a month to the day later, and she didn't go to the police. So I was very frustrated by this because, like, not only did she not go to the police when Charles was shot, but not even after this case went public. Like, when the kids were missing, the only friend of Lori's who went to the police that I'm aware of her own volition, was Ann Eliason. And I think she said she has a brother in law enforcement and maybe like had roots to Arizona. But she's the only one. Everyone else had to be tracked down, like they would get a name of someone, and then that person would give, other names, like, oh yeah, so and so and so and so was also here, so the police had to had to find out who these women were and track them down. And that's significant because it's like, here you said a month before Charles was killed that you would go to the police. Then he was killed. You didn't go to the police. Then you find out, oh, 2 kids are missing. And the man who you knew Lori was having an affair with, the whole group did. Christina was one of the 7 gatherers. And Zulema testified at Chad's trial that she thought Christina was the one who actually created the 7 gatherers Gmail account. So it's not like she was just like, I just feel like some of these friends, and understandably so, they're embarrassed. Well, no, that's understandably so is being too generous. I can understand why they're doing it. They're embarrassed. I'm sure the state, they're trying to make them look as normal as possible so that they'll have some credibility with the jury. But, the jury, they're not watching this live, and they're not supposed to be. And so, so this isn't information that obviously is going to be presented at trial. But it's just like, how in the world do you even find out, oh, not only did she, have Charles murdered, and by the person who said he wished that reportedly said he wished that he could just, murder Charles, and you don't do anything. And then she tried to say, I couldn't follow the logic. She tried to kind of pull a Melanie Gibb, like, yeah, I didn't know how he had died initially. And I thought it was like a brother-in-law. I thought, like, Charles' brother-in-law had shot him. And I'm like, again, do you hear yourself? Alex was Charles' brother-in-law. She knew that because she hung out with Alex, who was Lori's brother, so it's not even like, okay, well, maybe this was kind of hard to make this connection. Like, I was just like, what? Sometimes I listen to these people and I don't know whether to, you know, I don't, it's really just baffling. But anyway, so I do think, again, putting my personal feelings aside, I think for a jury, again, I imagine, and it really only takes one juror to be like, sorry. And I was just even sitting there today thinking, if they have an engineer on that jury, an engineer, an analyst, I know she wouldn't have wanted a lawyer on the jury, but anyone who is, a data scientist, anyone who just kind of has a gravitational pull toward like a very, very left brain type person. I think they're if there's just one, a lot of this testimony is just going to be severely discounted because, again, all right, take off my aunt hat and all of my personal entanglements, try to put myself in the mind of a juror. I just don't think that this sounds believable. I don't think that they're going to say, assume, wow, she's a coward. Alex said he wanted to kill Charles. Then Lori said she actually tried to poison him, and then you told her, hey, if anything happens to Charles, I'm going to the police. I just think they're just going to discount her testimony. Like, these testimonies that so far, they sound pretty contrived, and but then, and I don't know that the jury would have picked up on this, but she just kind of slid in there that she received an invitation for a lunch she thought was in August. And because I have this timeline just rattling around in my head, and I've spent so much time building this timeline, I'm like, August, that was the lunch for Serena when she moved to Arizona. So she lived in the Northeast. I don't want to disclose, but it was in the Northeast. And she, in the midst of all this, she and her family moved to Arizona about a month after Charles was killed. So they had this lunch, and let me pull up. I should have pulled this up. Yeah. So let me see if I can pull up the source. Oh, the source is a video. But we found out from Serena that there was a lunch in August when she had moved. I think Zulema also shared this in an interview. And a bunch of them, it was basically the 7 gatherers, all got together for lunch. So it was Lori, Zulema. Well, Serena had disclosed it was herself, obviously, even though she said she had been kicked out of the group in, I think, March. So, this is all in my timeline. But so it was Lori, Zulema, Serena, Melanie Boudreau, now Pulowski, Alex Cox, and Nicole. That's who Serena had shared. I don't know if Melanie Gibb was also at this lunch. I've always kind of wondered about that. Let me see if there was another reference to it. Yeah. She didn't include Melanie Gibb, but Melanie Gibb was usually, involved in these things. But and Christina didn't make it clear if she was just invited or she went. I'm inclined, I've tried to give people the benefit of the doubt, but the fact that she disclosed this makes me wonder if she thought that Lori would cross-examine her. That was probably my biggest disappointment of the day. But I do understand, I'm sure her advisory council said, don't touch it. There's too big of a chance that you'll go down with the ship. But so, I doubt that the jury probably really picked up on this, because they wouldn't have known that, hey, it was basically the 7 gatherers all getting together for lunch in August. So, about a month after Charles was killed. So for me, I'm now putting back on my, timeline curator, aunt, etc. hat, and saying, really? So you threatened to go to the police, which sounds like all kinds of bravado now. But, all of the things that I just mentioned, she didn't go to the police, not even after the kids were missing. And, but then you had lunch, or at minimum, you were invited to have lunch. Like, you threatened Lori that you were going to go to the police, and she invites you to have lunch a month later. So, I personally don't find her credible at all, but I think, and I think all of these women, they just try to like tiptoe through the tulips, like, oh yeah, as far as the casting, I was surprised Trina asked about like if they were if they were assigned different elements and stuff, and of course they're all distancing themselves from that, like, oh well, I was there when Lori prayed. Yeah, elements. Yeah, I don't really know about that. No, they had crystals. They had vibrating crystals. They had fire. Serena was water. Like, that was her special power. And I think Melanie Boudreau, I think she might have been I think Melanie Gibb was fire. Anyway, but or no, they had crystals, fire, and vibrating fire. So like vibrating fire, that's pretty hardcore. But it's just like, okay, yeah, I found that reference. This was from Zulema, who documented all kinds of things. Lori asked Zulema on May 5th, can you text me a list of the powers we are going to use? Zulema: crystals, vibrating fire, ice, water, lightning, wind, stormy sky, and fiery cherubim. She didn't actually say and. She said stormy sky, fiery cherubim. Then Zulema followed up again. I feel the ice is going to be the most critical because, as Mel said, it paralyzes them. Lori: I love it. That's so good. Space! Exclamation mark. She writes like a book. Well, no. Okay. Looking forward to talking in the morning. 2 exclamation marks. So this was like one of the Zoom calls that they all had. So yeah. So I mean, they were all in. Like, they all were assigned a different power, and then they would hold hands, and Christina was the one who added the detail for the June 9th. They had all fasted, and then got in the circle in Lori's backyard, held hands and prayed. Anyway, so yeah. So far, the only hat tip that I've picked up on to even like a hint of conspiracy are Christina's claim that she heard Alex say, more than once, he wished she could just kill Charles in front of a group of people, and then Lori saying that she had tried to poison Charles by putting some of JJ's medicine in a drink or a smoothie, depending on well, a smoothie is a drink, but uh, but I just I they could surprise me, but I think with a jury with that many men, especially, the chances of there not being one, and I don't mean to be prejudicial against the women, like, because obviously I kind of, I kind of defy some of the stereotypes, of women, but but you know anyone who has spent any kind of like significant amount of time with dudes, I mean, even in following this case, like, like I'll hear women commenting, in the live, and they're like, my husband is so tired of hearing about this case, whereas a lot of us who follow the case, we could talk about this, ad nauseum, but anyway, so I just, it's like, well, it was good to hear like a little bit of a hint of possible conspiracy, and we still have plenty of trial ahead of us, but I just don't think that Christina will be credible to the jury. So those are my impressions from the day. Now I'll take some time to answer questions. If you have a question, please just put the word question in all caps or use a question emoji. Probably not going to answer questions for too long, but I did just hit you with a lot of information, so okay. Veronica said, I think you are giving the men too much credit, LOL. Yeah, it's not, I'm not saying that men are more intelligent. I certainly am not saying that. I'm not saying that they are more, I just think that they're going to be not as impressed by theater. I think it was a nice break to their day, but when push comes to shove, even just having heard from the jurors after the other trials, they talked about how, like, they had, for Lori's trial, they had a more difficult time convicting her of her role in the murders, in Tylee and Tammy's murder, and especially Tammy's, and so, we did just kind of get a peek behind the curtain, as far as, how they processed it, and I know from, like, I have a friend who's a prosecuting attorney in New York City, and sometimes those jury rooms, I mean, they get heated. And this one friend told me there was one time they heard yelling coming from the deliberation room, whatever that's called. Excuse me. And it caused them, both sides, enough concern that they did a plea deal, but it was like rushed, because they had to get this plea deal signed before the jury came back with their verdict. So they were negotiating a plea deal, but if the jury had come back and said, we have a verdict, it would have been moot. They would have had to go with the jury. And so I don't remember the details. It's been a while since she told me about it, but they pulled the jury afterwards. And I think they were leaning toward acquittal. I'm pretty sure. So, but yeah, so, I just know a little bit from having friends in the judicial system that sometimes, I mean, it sounds like in Idaho, they were very well behaved. They were, they really held it together and, worked it out. And the one juror who was interviewed, had said, like, he was one of the ones who kind of held out. He wasn't so sure about Tylee and Tammy, but then was convinced by the other jurors. But, keep in mind, it only takes one. It only takes one to just be like, you know what? I think this whole thing was a dog and pony show. Like, why did you spend so much time on, like, trajectory analysis and, even if there was one other thing I wanted to touch on, because it had to do with the trying to prove that Alex didn't kill Charles in self-defense. So this was an interesting comment that someone made last night, and I saw it like within 3 minutes of the person commenting, and I was like, oh, this is a really good comment, I'm going to reply. But by the time I replied, excuse me, I entered the reply and saw that the status code for the page was a 404, which in geek speak means that the page was gone, which means there was either like a hiccup in the server or something. That's unlikely with a 404. The person deleted their comment. So I was like, well, come on, that was a good comment, and I replied right away. So it would have been within 5 minutes of this person leaving. It was a good comment. Like, I like it when people are like, hey, you know what? I think this, and excuse me. But she had said she was talking about Trina, and she said she was trying to prove that Alex had been hit, and he reached for it. There would be blood on the bag. So I'm reading it exactly. There are some typos. I think she was commenting pretty quickly. And he reached for it. So I don't know what he was saying. I don't know what that was supposed to be. And he reached for it. There would be blood on the bag, the zipper, the gun case, the gun, certainly on the bat. She's trying to prove it was not self-defense, that Alex was not hurt that bad, that a bat won't cut skin, that head wounds bleed like crazy, exclamation mark, no bloody rags in trash or at sinks. And I thought, I was so bummed that this person deleted the comment. And I even double checked to make sure, like, one of my mods didn't. I knew my mods wouldn't delete a comment like that. But, excuse me. But I thought, okay, you know what? I'm just going to address this. So she hit on a number of points, but they're salient points. And I'm sure other people have the same questions. Who knows? Maybe even the jury. But she was saying definitively there was no blood on rags in the trash. There was no blood on the bag. There was no, but I think what she was, pushing back on was my criticism that Trina focused so much on, okay, how about in this room, this random room? Did you find blood in this room? No? Okay, how about this room? No? How about this room? No? How about this room? Well, there was no testimony that they had. Oh, and there was one where it was like a lanyard on the kitchen wall, so well outside the conflict area. And then there was this, lanyard on the wall, and then Chandler Police had taken a picture of it, and she put it up on the Elmo and said, "Did this? How about this lanyard? Did it look like it had been moved?" And Detective Coons said, "No." so I think that's what she was pushing back on, because that, like, asking all these random questions, and like the only commentary about the bullet chilling in the middle of the room that I already knew from the police report had been noted that there was no expansion, and it wasn't particularly misshapen. Like, that was a sentence. It was like, I think that was when he said there was some deformation. That was it. I'm like, please tell me you're going to circle back on this point, especially if you're supposed to be an expert witness about trajectory. Like, riddle me this. How did that bullet just end up in the middle of the floor? So anyway, so I think that's what the person was pushing back on. Now I'm going to push back on the pushback, because there is no mention anywhere in the police report that they ever bagged any rags, that they even looked in the trash, that they bagged the trash. There's no mention. Now, I'm not saying that means that they didn't. I'm just saying the public does not know of any, like, bagging of evidence around, like, we looked at all of the trash cans, including the trash cans outside, to see if there was blood. Excuse me. And and all that to say, like, do I believe Alex was hit by the bat? No. I'm looking at this going, where are you going with this? Like, and that, but anyway, but here's where the pinch really comes in my opinion. She mentioned, like, no, what'd she say about the sink? No blood on the bag, the zipper, the gun case. Again, that I don't remember that evidence being presented, that, like, they, looked for blood on these things. But at the same time, it was such a small wound. Like, it just seems kind of unusual. And this is, just a random person, but that they would be looking at the bag, like the bag that I'm assuming she's referring to the bag that he carried the gun in, or maybe the trash bag that his clothes were in. I don't know what she's referring to, but by the fact that she added the zipper and the gun case, I'm thinking she's talking about the gun case, but he didn't even put the gun back in the gun case. He put it in the room, but he didn't put it in the gun case. It was on the floor. But the more damning piece for the state is that there was blood on what they called in the police report the aerator, and we saw it. It was on the faucet. So they saw blood on the faucet. They took a picture of it, but it actually explicitly says in the police report they did not send it for testing. So I'm like, well, then the state can't prove that blood wasn't Alex's. And I'm not saying it was. I'm just saying, like, you're talking about, all of this stuff, and I'm not saying that this person, was from the state, but I think, like, it's like you can't say, hey, you know what? Where were the bloody rags? Where were the bloody clothes? Where were the bloody whatever? I haven't seen, and I have read every page of the police report. That doesn't mean I'm infallible. It doesn't mean I, might have missed something. Inevitably, I go back into the police report looking for one thing, and something else will jump out at me. So all the caveats that I always throw out, they all apply. They especially apply in this situation. All I'm saying is, from what I've read and researched, I have never seen a single reference to them even looking for bloody rags. And then even when they did see blood, I mean, I've been, complaining about this since we first got the FOIA docs. Like, and this was in the early. This was a FOIA doc. This I believe was in the FOIA doc that Justin had gotten. Like, he was kind of, he was all over like these FOIA document requests, and I think this was in like the truncated report, because I think I'm pretty sure in the first live I did about Charles in 2020, I criticized that. I was like, what is the point of taking a picture of blood? Like, we have two people who ostensibly had wounds. I mean, obviously Charles had very significant wounds, but I'm just saying, Alex claimed that, he had that little boo-boo on the back of his head. So why wouldn't you send that blood for testing? So anyway, I just, again, it's just like with the scarring in the wood floor. Like, you have the round, you have the wood floor, you cut out the wood floor. You didn't think that it might be pertinent to test that scarring against the minimal amount of deformation in that, full jacket, full metal jacket, round, whatever they call it. You didn't think it would be important to compare that, especially given just how small. Again, if my perception was correct, and I was really locked in, I was looking at like the different screens just to make sure that I wasn't like misinterpreting this. But when I actually saw just how small that scarring was, I was like, oh, I would think it would be all the more important. Like, oh, we actually found wood fragments on it or whatever, like something. But they're like, nope. No, we just, we were just so confident that this was the bullet that, had this pretty ridiculous journey, that we just collected it and assigned it, an evidence ID and called it a day. So, okay, all right. I did a little bit of a bait and switch, but I was about to say something and it reminded me of that comment. So please know, like, if you, we had a troll on the site today, and I would put so much money on who this troll was, because this person was just filled with hysteria and rage. And at this point, people following this case, like, we are 5 years, and a lot of those ragey feelings have left most people, and they're really just kind of like, if you're still following the case at this point, you just want to know, like, what happened. We just don't see nearly as much of like the high estrogen, I'm on team so and so, I'm on team so and so, and this person on team so and so is clearly the spawn of Satan, because how could she say these things and report on the FOIA docs and all that. So aside from the occasional troll who appears, and this person was like, don't delete this, I was like, this is so choice, because this person commented on, like, it was a totally sarcastic post that I threw up this morning, because YouTube's algorithm is just drunk texting. I want to say site owners. Why am I not? Channel owners. Gosh, I'm just tired. Channel owners, like, we flagged this. We didn't just flag this comment as potentially inappropriate. When it flags it, it removes it. And I typically only check there like once every few months. And lately I've been checking it more because of ridiculous things like this comment that was flagged. And it was something I think the person said, like, be blessed or something like that, and it was flagged and removed as inappropriate, potentially inappropriate. So, it was tongue in cheek, like, please don't put the channel in jeopardy by leaving inappropriate comments. And I think the person just didn't even look at the screenshot and was like, basically came at me with both barrels. You deserve it, and all this stuff. Anyway, hilarity ensued. But the person had said, don't delete this comment. I was like, are you kidding me? I pinned it. We used to not be able to pin comments on, like, that are made on the community tab, but they added that ability. I was like, no way. This is good comedy. Having said all of that, we don't delete comments because someone disagrees. Like, my friends who I can, like, throw things out to, they disagree with me all the time. Like, I heard recently that another channel owner described me as a cult leader, and I'm like, that's just so ridiculous. Like, we don't demand conformity. We just ask for, like, respect. Just be kind and don't come in here like just filled with hysteria, because like, I mean, unless it's hilarious, like some of the stuff, it is going to be deleted. Like, if like, I have all kinds of comments. You are the reason the kids are dead. Like, you betrayed your brother. You did this, blah, 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 blah. You're profiting off the murder of children and all this stuff. These people, they know. I am like one of the only people reporting on this case who has not profited in any way. So, I think, but anyway, but having said all of that, like, I really appreciated this comment, and I like it when people make me think. I like it when they play, devil's advocate, or just like, sometimes like a lawyer will pop on and they'll be like, oh, actually, and in both ways, like, they'll clarify something that I said that may have been inaccurate, or not as informed. Like, maybe I didn't know that, oh, well, there's actually also a federal statute that dictates this and stuff. Totally appreciate that feedback. But okay. All right, so let me see if there are any. Oh, actually, let me check with my mods to see if they've collected any questions. I've been running on fumes so much, I even forgot that they normally did that last night, and until, like, I'd already scanned through a bunch of comments. All right. Okay, let me pull this up. Why am I not? Ran out of water. Okay. Okay, someone asked, do you think Christina had something to hide or was threatened, and that's why she didn't go to police? Being totally candid, I don't think she was threatened. I think if she had been threatened, I think she probably would have gone more the Audrey route. I don't believe Audrey was threatened. But, I just, first of all, let me say, when someone is threatened with, like, their life is threatened, like, unless you're in a gang, or, it was the 80s and you were a mafia, normal people don't say, oh, okay, I guess I won't go to the police because someone threatened me. They go to the police. Or one exception would be Tylee. In Tylee's case, and I'm not saying this because I'm her aunt, I'm saying this because as a minor who just happened to grow up in an environment where I was threatened, it's a very different situation because you are completely at the mercy of the person you're talking to take immediate and to believe you and take immediate action. And one time I even shared, like, a teacher drew me out one time, and he had seen something that caused him concern, and he tried to ask me what was going on in the home, and there was a reason for that. He wasn't just being intrusive. And I asked him, I said, can you guarantee me that if I tell you that I won't have to go back to that home, like I won't leave this school and go back to that home? And he was so upset, but he was like, I wish I could. I really wish I could, but no, I can't. And I said, then I can't tell you, because the reality is, I knew, having grown up with social services, if he reported anything that I said, it was going to go to social services, which most likely, in my mind, it was going to go to the foster parents who were the threat. They were the abusers. They were the ones who made me feel extremely unsafe. So, I don't share that detail to elicit sympathy. It's in Tylee's situation, like there was no one. No one has come to the surface where you're like, yeah, she could have trusted that person. We don't know if she tried with any of the family members, and I'm sure we will never know. But it wasn't safe. And that's why on the day, like was it the first day? When I found out that she and Lori met with a victim's advocate before they even left the police station, that hit me like a ton of bricks, because, I was just like, oh my gosh, like that had to have confirmed to Tylee, there is no one I can turn to. So having said that, aside from, gang, like someone who, like, they have things that they don't want the police to know about, so they're not going to go to the police, or going to the police could potentially put them in worse danger. For the most part, people go to the police, and even if she was like, oh, I'm kind of afraid, like, again, this is where I think, having a spouse, like just a less interested party, like if she had told her spouse, and I'm not even just saying this because, like, he's a man, it's just like that's another, like, I don't know, sounding board. Like, you know what? This woman just threatened my life because, I told her I would go to the police. Like, I'm sure someone in her life would have said, okay, yeah, you know what? We're going to the police. Like, we're not just writing this out. So no, I am not inclined to believe that Lori threatened her. And she didn't even say that Lori had threatened her. And I imagine Trina would have asked her if Lori had threatened her, and would have been eager to include that in her testimony. Okay. C.A. Kane asked, are you coming across any new evidence about Joe's murder? Also, do you think it might gain traction because of these other murders? No, I haven't come across anything yet. I did talk last night a little bit about potentially why Lori wouldn't have been more on top of, like demanding the extraction data. I did ask one of the reporters if they knew when she first requested the data, and hopefully that reporter will get back to me. It's really hard to find any of these documents because unlike Idaho, which used to have like a web page for, they called it cases of interest, and that's where I could get like all the filings and stuff. I haven't found anything like that for Arizona, so it's just harder to like track these things down without like going through Justin Lum's like Facebook page. So if someone knows of a way that I can just like go to one place and check these filings, I would be so grateful. I haven't found that out, but anyway. But aside from what I talked about last night, which, quick summary, I suspect Lori was probably initially ambivalent at best about getting Charles' phone data, because if she had Joe murdered, which we already know she bragged about it, but if she indeed had Joe murdered and paid Alex to do it, like Charles could have been, I'm not saying like an active part of the plan, but at least there is the possibility that he knew about it. And there was that video that I've shared on the channel where this was in January when he was talking to patrol officers with Gilbert police, and he said that Lori said to him, I'm gonna kill you too. And so, I heard that and was like, whoa, wait a minute. Stop the bus. This is January 2019. Ostensibly, no one has been murdered yet. So who was he saying that? I mean, obviously you wouldn't, if she had said something like that to him and he had no information, it would stand to reason that he would have said, I have no idea who she was talking about. But he changed the subject. So he said it, but it almost seemed like not even an excited utterance, just more like a, whoops, I didn't mean to talk about that, because he didn't expand on it at all. And the police suffered from a tragic lack of curiosity, or they didn't catch it. But so there is a possibility that Charles knew that Joe had been murdered, and we know that these family members weren't careful what they put in text messages, even pretty far into these murders. It really wasn't until about like September, October they started getting a little more tech savvy and deleting things and stuff. Still put really stupid stuff in texts and emails, but there is the possibility that if Charles knew, but then realized as soon as Lori called him Joe Ryan, which was less than 2 weeks before he was murdered, she said in a text, in the midst of a fight, okay, Joe Ryan. Charles may have at that point started, like freaking out, like, wait a minute. She just called me Joe Ryan. Am I now Joe 2.0? He knew that she was already threatening his life. If he knew that Alex actually murdered Joe, he had to have been really significantly afraid for his life. Well, from Adam's standpoint, he's in touch with Charles, and I do think, to be fair, I do think he had some level of genuine concern for Charles. But Adam was also full of self-interest, and if their whole family had been chatting about this murder, had put in anything in writing, I imagine the whole family was probably worried about, like, wait a minute, you're going to have another husband murdered. Now you're putting our whole family at risk. And, and now, like, you already got away with one murder, but you're going to get away with two. Well, yeah, she actually would have. If she would have stopped there, she, in my mind, undoubtedly would have gotten away with murdering Charles as well. But anyway, so, yeah, so all that to say, I suspect that there is a significant amount of evidence in that extraction data. And, again, there could also be exculpatory evidence, which I'm not going to go into that again tonight. But I think at this point, like, the state doesn't want it to come out because they're already having to deal with one shit trial with shit evidence. And, I'm sure the last thing Maricopa County's prosecutor's office wants is another trial around this case to, cast a spotlight on their subpar investigation abilities, we'll just say. So, so I imagine these FOIA documents will be heavily redacted, but they still let things slip. So who knows? Did Lori get any point across today? Okay, I see your multiple question marks. Again, I'm sure I am one against the wind. I think she did. I mean, if you put aside the fact that she is a despicable human being, psychopathic murderer, signed off on the murder of her own children, if you put aside all of those things, which admittedly is a very difficult thing to do, especially as a family member, but if you put aside all those things and evaluate her as a defense attorney, I would say yesterday and the day before, weak. Very weak. Like, where are you going? Your questions, like, I just felt like she just kept circling back because she really didn't have good questions. Today, I felt like she was prepared. Like, I noticed she was, like, she would ask a question and she would look back at her notes. She would ask a question, she would look back at her notes. Like, she had her questions prepared. And, again, I know that this is not a popular opinion, not that I really care about being popular. But, I mean, if you don't sit at my table, my Thanksgiving table, I'm not going to lose sleep over what you think of me. But her job as a defense attorney is to impeach witnesses. And I think she did a very good job at that. I say that as, like, with all the compassion I can possibly communicate toward Nancy Joe. Christina, not so much. She was part of this group. She was 7 gatherers. I don't believe most of what she says, because between, it's like when you get, like, the tidbits from, this person, then this person, then this person, then Zulema, who, I mean, if her lips are moving, she's probably lying, except her plea deal was contingent on being honest. So the rest of them, they're like 7 gatherers, never heard of it. But John Pryor, again, everyone was like, what the hell is he doing? What a dork, But he just kept asking, have you heard of the 7 gatherers? And the rest of them, who didn't have plea deals, they're like, what? Nope, never heard of it. And then Zulema gets on the stand. We find out, oh yeah, there was a group called 7 Gatherers, and they weren't emailing each other. They created an email address. They would write things, and it was like keeping a communal diary with disappearing ink. It was just like they would write things, and they were all staying in, like, the same email. And why would you do that? Because you can delete it. If anything goes south, you can delete it. So, and if it's true, if Zulema's memory is accurate, that Christina was the one who first created this Gmail account, they were being tech savvy. And why would you even have any concern about sending emails? Well, you don't want a digital record. So you can't claim any plausible deniability that, whoa, I mean, oh, you know what? She did have some funky prayers. Now it all makes sense. I had no idea. In all of these Zoom calls that we did, and all these times we got together and we fasted and we did this, and then, and then we supposedly all these people are kicked out of the group, but then they come back together in August for a lunch, and and so anyway, yeah, so I do think that she did her job. She really doesn't have to make points. Like, her main job at this point with the state's witnesses is to try to impeach them, attack their credibility, things like that. And she didn't do a good job. Those things she didn't do a good job, but she's really not supposed to be making points. Like, she will have her day, excuse me, where if she has any witnesses, apparently she subpoenaed Detective Moffat, and I was like, oh, great, I'll allow it. Yeah. So I don't know yeah, anyway, so that will be her opportunity to actually make points. Right now, it's the state's job to make points, and it's Lori's job to refute them or call into question, the witness's credibility or the evidence and things like that. And so, again, so much love and compassion for Nancy Jo, but I think she did that. All right, Annie, do you know that JJ and Tylee were definitely outside the house when the shots were fired? No, that is only Lori and Tylee's testimony. I don't believe it. I don't believe it at all. Knowing what I know of JJ, having seen when he would get upset by something, when he got upset, I mean, he got really upset. It was screaming, and it took a lot to bring him, back down to homeostasis. So, and they couldn't get out of the house without passing the living room. And also, JJ is a runner. If he's awake, he was very active, like there was no, like, I mean, it was like, from my perspective, he was awake and he was going. And, I mean, when I say he was running, he was literally a runner. Like, he would just run these circuits in the house and stuff. And so very, very energetic. And, and with his autism, that made processing stressors more difficult. That's why he had Bailey, and the detail about Bailey, him losing Bailey, that is just always just, it's difficult to even talk about, just because it's like, it had to have been one of JJ's most devastating losses. And yeah, but anyway, so, but like, Bailey helped him recalibrate. Bailey wasn't in the house. Bailey was in Houston. So, the risk of him being awake, like, oh, okay, we're just gonna wake him up, get him ready for school, get him dressed, and Tylee is going to go outside with him. In my opinion, it is absolutely outside the realm of possibility. So I mean, okay, my opinion, I I suspect that Alex used a suppressor. We know that they found a suppressor in Rexburg um, when they left. Uh, I strongly suspect he used a suppressor, and a suppressor doesn't mean there's no sound, but it is significantly reduced. And I suspect that the kids were both asleep for even the preliminary cleanup. Um, so just judging by the time that Charles' phone left the house, and I always will think it's amazing that she thought she was so slick and took off with Charles' phone, but he had location activated. So I did a live just on like everywhere the GPS pinged, according to the police report, and she was quite the busy bee. But anyway, so there wasn't a lot of time uh, from the time she arrived, or I'm sorry, from the time Charles arrived to the time she left with his phone. So I don't think she helped out very much at all with the cleanup. Um, but I suspect that Tylee was woken up right before they left, and I suspect that JJ was drugged, and we know from the babysitter, I think, in Idaho, someone had said that sometimes, that Lori said sometimes she gives JJ like an extra pill or something like that to get him to sleep longer. I definitely think that happened in this scenario. I think when JJ was brought out, he was sound asleep. It just would have been way too risky for that, for him to see his dad, on the floor. But then, they took him to school, so he also would have had to go through the whole day. So I just strongly suspect Lori took measures to ensure that JJ wouldn't wake up. So yeah, no one knows if they were actually outside, but I don't believe any of that testimony. I think, or not testimony, statements. I think Tylee was made to lie. And as I have said many, many times, if Tylee was afraid that she could be next, she was right. Aw, thank you, Carrie. She put in all caps, question, no question. And then kind words. That was very sweet. Okay. Do you think that Lori representing herself is a huge red flag to the jury? I, I, I'm sure they've been given instruction that since that is her constitutional right, that they are not supposed to hold that against her. One thing that was concerning after Chad's trial was the judge was so clear on, like, it is a defendant's constitutional right to choose not to testify on his or her own behalf, and they were not to count that against the defendant. And then at least one of them, maybe more, talked about how they were really surprised, or maybe even disappointed. I don't remember the exact words that they used, that Chad didn't take the stand. And I was like, I wanted to be like, no, stop, don't say that. But yeah, so yeah, I'm sure it still is. They're still human, but they could just think it's a function of arrogance. I think that there is the possibility that they might be a little more understanding because she had public defenders. So who knows, I don't even know how much they will end up learning about, like her trials in Idaho, if she's actually convicted. I think that's only if she testifies on her own behalf, that there's that risk. But anyway, so I don't know. I'm sure. Uh, I'm sure at times it's frustrating, at times it's good theater, and I just think they probably just think this is weird. Everything is weird. The witnesses are weird. Everything, just everything is weird. Uh, why do you think Lori didn't cross-examine the Christina lady? I was disappointed. That one I was definitely disappointed about. I suspect her advisory council just probably told her, and who knows, maybe she decided for herself. Um, there was no way she was going to be able to impeach her without the possibility of Christina getting in, some digs. And even if, the she objects and requests that the statement be stricken from the record, which I don't think she's done to date. Like, there was something today, I was like, I'm pretty sure she should have requested that be stricken from the record. But anyway, yeah, I just think it was probably just too much of a slippery slope. And also, she wasn't able to keep her cool with Nancy Joe. So who knows? It might have been like at lunch. They were like, "Do not do it. Do not do it. You don't, you don't have the emotional constitution for this." But because what makes this unique, obviously, is going to be a bit of a statement of the obvious. Is, yeah, she's working as a defense attorney, and even as a defense attorney, you don't want to come across as onerous to the jury. I think that really worked against John Pryor, because he just came across as so unlikable, and would attack the wrong witnesses. It would be like these guys who like worked for the FBI. It came across like he was really kind of digging into anyone who may have made him feel personally insecure. And but anyway, so you don't want to come across, I would imagine, as too, too despicable, too greasy. But, in her case, I think it's even more important because she's the actual defendant. This is why defendants generally don't represent themselves. So she's walking a fine line, and I suspect, I suspect it was her advisory council who told her, there's 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 not enough you can, there's just too much risk. But who knows? Okay. Someone asked, I've heard about jurors sleeping and playing on their phones. Have you witnessed any of that? Yes, both. One guy was, he, and this wasn't just for like a second. I mean, it was a pretty long period of time. I don't know how long, but I mean, it was so obvious. He was like sitting in his chair with his head back like this, and at one point, like, his mouth was kind of open. He wasn't snoring, I'll give him that, but his mouth was open. And and I was even like looking to see, like, is he just being kind of unusual? Like, are his eyes maybe, slit? But, so he's still listening, but catching a little catnap. But, yeah, all I can say is it certainly appeared like he was asleep. And then, yeah, there was a guy yesterday who was on his phone. Again, this was a pretty protracted period of time. I don't know how long, because like I said last night, I don't really pay a lot of attention to the jury. Um, but when Janice pointed it out to me, then I was like, okay, all right. How long is he gonna go here? And then we had those like really technical questions. So when the judge read the technical questions, I was like, yeah. So because I like Janice and I were like right in front of him, on the second row, obviously not on the first row. That's for the family, but second row, like he was dead ahead. But yeah, so they let him stay on even after he told the judge he wasn't on his phone. I think it was Trina who was like, witnesses, multiple witnesses saw you were on your phone. I think it was her, and I think she said something to that effect. And then, eventually he was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah, I was on my phone, but I wasn't on websites or anything like that." But the judge asked him point blank, "Were you looking at your phone?" Like, it was something. It was very point blank, and he had said no. And then it was like, "Oh well, yeah, I was on my phone, but I wasn't on any websites. I was just texting my daughter, I think, to make sure she was awake or something." So, but I think at this point they're just. I think they're worried that they're going to run out of jurors. Has the jury been attentive? Do they look confused? Are there any jurors who are more or less attentive than the average? I just can't answer because I haven't been attentive. I've been attentive to the details. I'm taking notes. I'm looking things up and working on the app. So I haven't been attentive to the jury. But I'll ask the others who were in the courtroom and paying more attention to that. Oh, Sky Girl, the Sky Girl view. Excellent question. I've asked the same thing. Why does any of the wound path and etc.? So she's talking about like all this trajectory analysis. Why does it matter if they're proving conspiracy? Lori made that point too. Like even when they were trying to bring Detective Coons in as a witness, as an expert witness, she was like, why do they even have an expert witness about like testifying about trajectory? Like, this is a conspiracy case, And I was like, dang, I hate to agree with her, but yeah, I'm like, okay, like, and that's why I thought, I wondered when I saw that comment last night about, oh, there was no blood here, there's no blood here, there were no bloody rags, and I'm like, is this like the common thought that people have? Like, oh, we're just going to assume in absentia that, well, no one has said anything about a bloody rag or anything, so we're just going to assume that, of course, they bagged the laundry and the trash and went outside to see what trash was, they were putting out on the curb and stuff. But yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to succumb to arrogance myself. I like the state. We need to give them time and space. Like, we're only on day 3. She may be building to something. Maybe some of the other detectives can round out some of these, rough edges. But yeah, I'm not really sure why they're even focused so much on. Like, okay, even if they convince the jury that Alex didn't shoot Charles in self-defense, Like, if Alex were on trial, I mean, he'd be up the river. Like, I think a jury would have no problem believing that Charles was not shot in self-defense. Again, we haven't, seen like the text messages and stuff like that. And that's what I really look forward to, seeing, okay, wait, are you just kind of holding back here? But even if they convince the jury that Alex didn't shoot Charles in self-defense, that doesn't prove conspiracy. That doesn't prove, like, there are protocols, there's a burden of proof that's on the state to show that Lori conspired with Alex. Now, do I believe Lori conspired with Alex? 100%. But that's based on other cases and other sketch details, like Joe's death, that the jury most likely won't hear anything about, so yeah, I believe it. What I'm holding out hope for is that at some point, America, that Trina is just going to be like, haha, here we go. I put all the boring stuff first. Put all my weirdest witnesses first, because we know that we're also going to hear from Serena. I don't think they're calling anyone else from the Seven Gatherers. I think they probably just watched Idaho and were like, nope, nobody likes Melanie, and Zulema. They're not going to be credible. It's just not even worth it. So I don't know. I look forward to hearing more about the text messages. I hope that there's a lot more that we haven't seen yet. Did you think it was a good hit from Nancy Jo when she said Charles told her that Lori was having an affair after Lori grilled her after having a date with Charles, a married man? Yes. Ideally, a victim isn't supposed to be combative. So if I can take off my juror hat and, my kind of more exacting, like, I don't think she really helped the state with that. If I put on back on my aunt hat and just like, someone finally said something to Lori that we're all thinking, yeah, it was a great dig because it was the height of hypocrisy. But it was just an allegation. I don't know how much evidence the jury will actually see of like her affair with Chad. Hopefully they do. But at least for what has been presented, thus far, there's nothing for the jury to be like, oh, so she was having an affair. It was, it really looked more like a cat fight, and two women trying to get the upper hand. Yeah. Okay. Someone asked, who do you think is feeding Lori info regarding Nancy Jo meeting Adam a week or so at pickleball? I don't know how much she knew, if anything. I think, there is a good chance that she just suspected. You know what? Okay, so let me take a step back. This is where the fact that I'm not in the legal profession kind of works against me, because I don't really know all of the, like, how much is disclosed in like the disclosure, requirements, because I do know from having talked to a friend who's a judge, if this judge was explaining to me, like, because I had asked, like, what dictates how much the state has to disclose to the defense. And and they had explained, some of the technicalities, like anything that is potentially exculpatory, meaning like it introduces like evidence that may suggest someone else was involved, or the DNA in this, fingerprint or whatever, it didn't match the defendant's DNA, and things like that. And not handing over evidence that is potentially exculpatory is a very, very egregious offense. But then this judge, they had told me that anything the defense requests within reason. So I think it was John Pryor, or it might have been Mark Means. That it was like just this, really sweeping, just everything, and a bag of potato chips, and that the judge, the judge sided with the state, on like you can't just like basically ask for, all of your Excel files, all of your PDFs, all of the evidence that you have. And he didn't do that. Whoever it wasn't that bad, but it was bad. And so the judge was like, nope, you're gonna have to limit the scope. But if the scope is within the protocol, if the defense specifically asks for discovery, it's my understanding the state is beholden to turn it over to the defense. And then at that point, and according to my friend who is a judge, they said that's where the state can get into trouble, where the defense requests discovery. And like that's what happened with Mark Means with that one filing. It was a really extensive amount of evidence that he had required, he had asked the state for, and hadn't received. And then he actually asked for the judge to censure the state for not providing the evidence. He said that he even drove, now I don't know if this is true, but he said that he drove from Boise, or wherever he lived outside of Boise, to Fremont County because he wasn't getting return calls. And was told the prosecutor wouldn't even come down and meet him, wouldn't provide the evidence. Who knows how much of this is true, if any of it. But what we do know is that then, he was disqualified. And then the case was paused because Lori was receiving psychiatric care. And then we don't know if the evidence that was turned over 2 weeks late was that same evidence that he had requested and had detailed in this filing. I happen to have gone like line by line through that filing because there were so many dates. And it was like, well, on, let's just say, July 1st, you interviewed Melanie Gibb, or the Attorney General's office interviewed Melanie Gibb. I think this was actually one of the details. We don't have a record of this interview. There were PDFs that were corrupted. There were audio files that were corrupted, and and so I was very familiar with this filing from having gone through all the dates. Like, oh, dope. Okay, so Melanie Gibb was interviewed on this day. This person was interviewed on this day. This person was interviewed on this day. But my friend, the judge, had said that, like, in a situation like that, yeah, that is more egregious. Like, if the defense specifically requests discovery, and then that discovery isn't provided, that is serious. Now, the judge knew if the evidence that they turned over 2 weeks late was the same evidence that Mark Means had complained about, but there were similarities. Like when Jim Archibald went, he was understandably furious, and when he went down the list of the evidence that had been turned over, combining that with the one female a prosecutor, I can't think of her name off the top of my head. She's now a judge. But she had mentioned, oh, we discovered there were like PDFs, I think, that were like corrupted and this and that. And but anyway, so it may have been the same evidence. But so, yeah, so I don't, all that to say, to make a short story very long, I don't know that Lori had been fed information. There may have been something in the discovery that tipped her off, that Nancy Jo had been in touch with family members, or there's just the possibility that, Lori just said, you know what, this is worth chasing that gopher down its hole. Like, have you had any communication with family members around the case? And then I think she specifically asked about Kay. But yeah, so yeah, I don't know that anyone fed her that information. Okay, I'll answer one more question. Well, this was an easy one. Did Lori always blame Tylee for everything? I really don't know. I kind of doubt it. Because I've talked about this before, but the dynamic between Lori, Tylee, and Colby was different than I think people tend to think, because she ended up being such an authoritarian monster in the end. That is the one thing that I will give Summer in terms of, yeah, that's the thing that I think changed with Chad. The fact, this whole idea of she was this wonderful mother and person, and then she met Chad, and then Chad led her down the primrose path. I absolutely do not believe that. She has too many skeletons in her closet. I've witnessed them. And also keep in mind, just because a particular show you watch goes in that direction, it can look like, oh, okay, so all of these different people who were interviewed for this show were interviewed for about 5 to 7 minutes, and they all agree that Lori was a fantastic mom, and then she met Chad, and then, woke up a spawn of Satan. Like, if that's the story that they choose to go with, and I'm not criticizing any of these shows for going with that story, because I think it's more interesting and is probably part of the reason so many people followed the case. But because it's so interesting and bizarre, like, wow, how do you go from like, soccer mom to cult mom, and the most hated mom in America, supposedly. But yeah, but the dynamic that I saw is Tylee and Colby. They were the stronger personalities, and when Lori said that she was like more of a people pleaser and a peacemaker, and I've said this before, that I'm inclined to agree with. So I like, the dynamic that I saw when I first got there was that Tylee was kind of almost more like Nancy Jo to her mom. Like, just that, like being ready to snap back, like there was a defensiveness, there was a tension. And I've said this before. At first, when I first got there, I was saddened by it. I could definitely see that Tylee was depressed. And it was sad, just having known that she was like such a spirited little girl, it definitely made me sad to just, you know, see her almost as like a shell of what she was. But she had a strong personality as a little girl, so I wasn't surprised that she still had a strong personality. It was probably less than 2 days into, no, definitely less than 2 days into the trip when Lori started saying grossly inappropriate things. I was like, oh, okay, this isn't Tylee just being entitled because, she's living in this palatial dwelling with this amazing pool and, and just wanting her way. Of course, I mean, I'm sure there was plenty of that. She was a teenager with a strong personality and living a largely pretty privileged life. But, Lori couldn't keep the facade for even more than a couple days before, her freak flag really, started flying sky high. It was just, yeah, anyway, so all that to say, I don't think that she would have been blaming Tylee for everything to Tylee's face. I do think that there was an undercurrent in the family where Tylee was the black sheep. And I will forever think, until someone provides compelling proof of otherwise, I think that is why she wasn't at Colby's wedding. And, to that point, it has now been probably 3 months since Kelsey said that they would provide video proof that Tylee was at their wedding, and they had a Dateline episode. That is prime real estate they are always looking for exclusive content. And that's a prime opportunity. No one has seen this video footage or any pictures that weren't ridiculously photoshopped. There was one, it was photoshopped. She was at least a year younger, I would say closer to 2 years younger than she actually was. And thankfully I just snuck that one picture of her when we were out at like Dave and Buster's or wherever we were, and she and her mom were playing air hockey or whatever they were doing. I snuck a picture, 2 pictures, and but anyway, so yeah, I do think that there was a significant undercurrent in the family, and I think that I am quite confident Tylee knew that she was not accepted. Even when Colby told that one story about this one Christmas, and and I really want to be careful with this story because he was admitting fault, so I never want it to be like, this person admitted fault. So I really want to approach this as gently as possible. But he told a story and it was kind of a mea culpa, like about his selfishness. And I'm actually going to and come to his defense a little bit if you just hang in there. But he had said that this one Christmas he wanted 2 pair of Air Jordans, and because of it, like, I think Tylee, I don't know if she didn't get any gifts, or like just maybe like the majority of the Christmas budget was reallocated to Colby. But excuse me, first of all, I will say that should not have been on a kid. Like, so this wasn't on Colby, this was on Lori or anyone who signed off on this. Like, oh, well, you know what, the favorite child wants 2 pair of Air Jordan, so sorry, Tylee, you're not going to get anything, or you're not going to get anything big, or so I absolve Colby of any responsibility in that. However, that story indicates that yeah, there was a willingness to treat Colby, in a preferential way. And so I do suspect that Tylee felt very much one against the wind. So would she have let anyone like overtly get away with like blaming her for everything? No. And I think to some degree, I imagine the family in front of her they were probably like tiptoeing through the tulips a little bit, but um, there definitely seemed to be like some kind of back channel, communication or understanding that she just wasn't even welcome, to the point where even Colby's stepbrothers were in the wedding party, and Tylee wasn't even at the wedding. So okay, this the okay, yeah. This will be the last question because I think this is pretty significant. This has been spoken of in. Oh wait, no. This is. It looks like in the chit chat. I can't tell. Mods, if you add like any kind of commentary, could you like put that in all caps? I don't want to be. I know one time I actually read out loud like a comment that a mod had made to me, but. So the reference to chit chat makes me think that there is some commentary from one of the mods, because that's the title of one of our groups, or one of our messenger groups. But anyway, but I think the question is, do you think with all the gun talk, Lori is going to say it was Tylee who actually shot Charles? It gets the conspiracy theory idea off the table. I don't. I don't think that. I mean, I could be surprised, but I just don't. I think I suspect she will just continue to go with the whole story. She asked Alex to come there and stay the night to protect her. Interestingly enough, Alex was like, "What? No, I didn't go there to protect her. I went there because they were supposed to do something fun in the morning." Which, like, dude, you live 10-15 minutes away. I've been driving around Phoenix today. I'm like, you didn't need to spend the night at your sister's to go do something in the morning. But but yeah, but her story was that she asked Alex to come and protect her, and then Alex shot Charles, because Charles, went after him with the bat. So I think it would be tragic, like from a defense perspective. Like I don't think that there would be any benefit to her. Like, I think it was absolutely deplorable that she accused Tylee of murdering JJ, and then also kind of toyed with the idea of it being an accident, and so who knows. But I mean, it was laughable because it's just like there is compelling evidence that Tylee was murdered 2 weeks before JJ. So, it was ridiculous. But I think, yeah, I think that was a one-trick pony for her. I think she's going to stick with the defense that Alex shot Charles after Charles hit him with the bat, and it was in self-defense. Okay. On that note, I am going to go to bed. Always a pleasure. And I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to go live tomorrow. I might. Hopefully it won't be as like today, and like I said, I knew everyone would be focused on the Nancy Joe testimony, but I was kind of focused on other things, just so it was a heavier lift for me today. Not so much emotionally, just more like researching, and because I don't want to overstep. I don't want to misspeak. I want to be responsible as possible. So it required a lot more research, and I probably shouldn't have gone to Joe's apartment today. Um, but anyway, so if tomorrow doesn't require a significant amount of research, then I will go live tomorrow. I'll try to do it nightly. But anyway, have a great night, and we will talk again. I can say that. Good night.